Well, hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Big League Philanthropist. I am sitting here with Marissa Coleman, VP of Business Development at Gaming Society. Marissa, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. We're excited to chat with you.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome. Well, I know you kind of started your career at University of Maryland. You played a decade in the WNBA. Before we get into Gaming Society and everything around it, tell us about what that journey was like, how playing basketball, both at College Park and at in the WNBA, has influenced who you are today. Give us a snapshot of what that was like for you.
Super fortunate to be able to live out my dream. I remember I was 10 years old. I told my dad I wanted to be one of the greatest basketball players, and he sat me down and made sure I understood what it was going to take to get there. So just feel very, very fortunate. And then now at this point in my life, just really understanding that so much in sports mimics, reality in life. A lot of those intangibles, a lot of those things translate to the workforce, to, being an entrepreneur. So a lot of those are a lot of those things that people are looking for, whether it's the leadership, being able to work as a team, time management, knowing when to sacrifice it. So a lot of those things, being an athlete, you just can't get those lessons anywhere else.
Yeah, I think it's such a great kind of microcosm of life. You get to learn how to fail. You get to learn how to kind of like reach a goal with other people that, maybe you aren't meshing well personality wise, but you have to figure out that team dynamic and get to that goal. So 100%, I love those intangibles. What was the journey like, kind of thinking about, all right, it's been 10 years. I've been playing in WNBA for a while. Like, what's next for me? So walk us through like how you figured out what that was. Was that process easy? Did it take a while? Give us a little snapshot of how you got into what you're doing now.
It's been a long time coming. I've always, business has always been another passion of mine. I knew from a very young age that business ownership, entrepreneurship was something that interests me. So in college, one of my college teammates, her dad at the time owned like 30 Domino's pizzas, a Gold Gym, and a steakhouse. And I was told him, Mr. Wallace, when the time comes, I'd love for you to mentor me because I could see franchising as a space I'd like to get into. What appealed to me is that, you're given this general blueprint, this guideline, similar to being given a scouting report prior to a game, and it's up to you to execute it. So that really appealed to me. So maybe like 2013, he approached me and said, I found what we're going to do. And Mellow Mushroom at the time, I'd never heard of. He takes a lot of road trips, and he had stopped at one, fell in love with it. That following weekend, he picked me up and we went to North Carolina and we looked at quite a few, and we both just fell in love with the concept. And we opened in October 2016. So that was the real concrete step into my, entrepreneurship business goals. But just always surrounding myself. Well, first, like my parents have always instilled like basketball is going to come to an end at some day. So they, always harped on academics. And then once I did get to the professional level, just making sure that, I was always forward thinking and what's going to be next. So just really during my career, making sure I aligned myself with people on that similar path and finding mentors in different areas of interest of mine, just so that when I did hang them up, it wasn't shell shock. And I'm like, okay, like, what do I do now? Just making sure I had those steps already aligned.
Yeah, I love the mentorship aspect and the fact that you were kind of thinking about it like, all right, this is happening eventually. So let me start to make some relationships now that could pay off when that does happen. So I think that's really awesome. And I think a lot of athletes are getting into entrepreneurship earlier and earlier, especially now with NIL coming out. That's been a huge kind of change in the way that college sports has worked. So it's great to hear that you had the interest and kind of explored that with someone that was already in the area so that they could bring you along their path. And again, like you said, franchising has that blueprint. So it was a great way to kind of shift from a sports mentality to a business mentality. And I think that's really awesome. Now, how did you get from franchising into Gaming Society? I know, and again, like into sports betting, like how did this become an interest for you? Tell me a little bit about like, where did you go from there, from Mellow Mushroom?
Yeah, it's definitely not a path that I saw myself going on. If you would have asked me 5 years ago, if I saw myself being in the sports betting space, it would have been a big fat no, mainly because as an athlete from day one, you're told stay as far away from sports betting as possible. They make you
Right.
watch videos, you have to sit in seminars before tournaments to make sure you understand that you should stay as far away from it as possible. And then, seeing documentaries growing up and all these careers and these high profile athletes who their careers were ruined because they involved themselves in sports betting. So a good friend of mine, Justin Ross, he approached me about, probably 3 years ago now. Maybe even about 4 years ago, and put it on my radar that, that upcoming election. So 2020 was going to be, sports betting was going to be on the ballot in Maryland, and I should really start to look into it. And I was like, I don't know. We'll see. And then as the election grew closer, he called me. He's like, you should share the campaign. I'm like, absolutely not. Like, one, I'm still an active player. Like, two, but then I did some due diligence. I talked to some other mentors of mine and kind of shifted my thinking, and more so like staying so far away from it. Why not immerse myself in this space and find a way to bring other athletes in this industry that is making billions of dollars off of our performance? So why not, one, shift the narrative there, and then two, also shift the narrative around athletes being so scared and intimidating by this space. There's ways to be involved in this space without compromising your integrity and your values. So just ended up sharing the campaign, learned a ton, met a ton of people, and the areas of opportunity I saw were aligned with gaming society. And in sharing that campaign, there was not one call or meeting I was on where there was a mention of a female sports league or a female athlete. So obviously, for obvious reasons, that was glaring to me. It's like, wow, like I know there's an audience for this. I know how passionate fans of women's sports are, but these people, because they always look at it from such a narrow lens, they don't understand the value in it. That was one, and then two was, I'd probably say 99.9% of the calls, I was the only minority on the call, and probably 95% of them, I was the only woman. So seeing that too is like, okay, how do I immerse myself? How do I get into this space in a meaningful way where I can bring on other minorities and women too? So those were two very important things to me. And I was actually getting ready to start my MBA program at Georgetown and work with another company in the sports betting industry. And Jamie Messler and I connected on LinkedIn, and we had a conversation, and there was just a lot of commonalities. We wanted to build, we saw those same areas of opportunity. And she asked me if I'd like to come on board and help build it out. And it all happened within a matter of probably like a week. It happened.
Oh, wow, quick.
But when you feel that connection, and it just made sense.
Yeah. And I love the idea that this was something that kind of you had already immersed yourself in, you had this experience, and you were seeing gaps, and gaming society seemed to also see those same gaps, that you were like, okay, this is a company I can work with to help fill those gaps. So I really love that connection. And like you said, if it's authentic and it's awesome and you guys are working towards the same goal, it's great that you were able to connect and be able to build this together. And you mentioned one thing that I wanted to ask you about, right? We've obviously seen a well-deserved explosion of women's sports on the mainstream side of the sports industry. How do you feel like that's been reflected on the sports betting side, right? It got legalized around the country. States are one by one legalizing it very quickly. Like, have you seen the women's sports betting space take off just like women's sports in general is taking off, or is that still lagging behind? Where do you see it right now?
It's still lagging behind, and that's one of the main reasons I joined Gaming Society is our Bet on Women campaign and movement that we've created. Using that as an opportunity to make it more equitable in sports betting. We really see sports betting as a tool to bring more visibility to women's sports, see it as a tool for the fans of women's sports that are always there for them to interact, because women's sports, and I can speak to it just from what I've seen playing, over the past 20 years and, playing at such a high level, is they crave that community. And as women, female athletes, we are more accessible than our male counterparts, because we understand that for our leagues to survive, it's the fans that are holding us up, and they truly do love what we do. So knowing that fans of women's sports, they crave that interaction, they crave any way to be connected to what they're watching and whatever the sport may be. So using sports betting as a tool for both of those avenues.
Yeah. And you mentioned the Bet on Women campaign, and that's really a big part of the platform at Gaming Society. Give us a little bit more detail for those listeners that are like, oh, I didn't know that this was a thing. Tell us about what it is. I know you guys do some newsletters, roundtables, you have reports that come out specifically around the women's sports leagues and teams. So tell us a little bit about what that campaign is all about and the specifics of like, how can people get involved with that campaign?
Yeah, so Bet on Women is a phrase that we licensed from the WNBA Players Association. So we represent that exclusively. There was an article written by Nneka Ogwumike, who's the Players Association president. She wrote it on Players Tribune, which that Jamie Messer, our founder of Gaming Society, that was her first startup. So anyway, Nneka wrote that article as we were negotiating the CBA agreement, and they trademarked it. So we represent it exclusively, and just using Bet on Women as a movement. Like I said, one, to onboard new fans. So there's already people that will bet on literally anything. They'll bet on darts, they'll bet on ping pong, they'll bet literally anything out there they will bet on. So using Bet on Women to bring visibility. And the more you can put eyes on something, it's hard to bet on something you can't see. It's hard to bet on something you don't know. So if we're telling the stories of these women, if we're finding ways to show their games more, if we're showing the depths of them, we're showing how skilled they are, then those people that'll bet on anything, that's something else from the bet on. And I also am a firm believer in, yes, we're not going after, well, me personally, I don't ever want to go after those men that are naysayers or like stay in the kitchen, this and that. I want to go after the men that just never seen the game, that they respect it, they just never seen one. Because I've had numerous people come up to me over the years, men in particular, saying all it took was me to go to one game. All it took was for me to watch one game, and now I'm hooked. So finding more of those types of sports fans and just telling the stories. And when they hear about our journey and they see how drastically different it is from the men, they'll be more inclined to follow. So that's one. And then two is, again, as I previously mentioned, fans of women's sports, they crave these things. They want to bet on their favorite player. They want to hear the story. So it's really just about using this as a tool to bring more visibility to women's sports and to tell the stories of these female athletes. Because I've been so fortunate enough to play with and play against some brilliant women, and it's always just blown my mind how these stories aren't out there. Like we have talented musicians, we have entrepreneurs, we have authors, we have poets, we have great coaches, and the stories aren't told. And I've always said that I think that if more of the sports world knew what a female athlete in general, but speaking more narrowly, in female basketball players went through professionally, they would have a lot more respect, because it's quite the journey, and we really just do it for the love of the game.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I think it's 100% true. Going back to the point about if people just get the chance to see it, get the chance to experience it, there's nothing not to like. And it's especially for someone that's a sports fan already and already bets on other sports. It's just like you said, getting them access to watch, getting them access to be participants. And so I think that's really great. And like you said, storytelling is a great way to do that. Like telling the stories of the women in the game, behind the game, all of those kinds of things are so important. And that kind of leads me into my next question, right? A lot of people, yourself included, that are involved in Gaming Society are former athletes from across all different sports, both men's and women's. Why former athletes getting involved? Like, why did Jamie and you guys come together to say, okay, this is important to have a lot of athletes behind this? And what advantages do you think you guys have because you have this really great group of former athletes like yourselves pushing this forward?
Yeah, I mean, that was another thing that Jamie and I immediately clicked on. And one of the many reasons I respect her the way I do is that, I mean, she represented athletes for most of her career, Paul Pierce, Kevin Love, like some big names. So she gets it, and she sees the athlete's value. And with it being a space that makes so much money off of the athlete's performance, it only makes sense to try to bring them in. And I think, athletes, we have a unique perspective on everything. And again, as I mentioned earlier, just the intangibles that as athletes you pick up along the way are very valuable in building a business and in business in general. But I just think the more athletes we can bring into this space, it helps the industry as a whole kind of knock down that stigma. It's using athletes to change the narrative. Sports betting doesn't have to be this nasty, dirty thing. It can be, what we really want to do is just democratize it, make it more inclusive for everybody. It's not about betting $1,000 on tonight's game. It's about betting $20 so you have skin in the game. It makes it more fun. It's about, betting against your friend. It's about building a community more so than making money. That's not the audience, we're going after. We're not going after the group that wants to, make thousands of dollars. We're going after the group that wants it to be a social experience. It wants it to be more of a community thing, and having athletes telling the stories around the sports. I mean, having Kevin Garnett tell stories about, NBA finals, having Michael Vick talk about his journey, those are important things in this space. I think you bring storytelling into sports, but it's pretty unique because it makes it more about the storytelling than just a bet. It brings more color to it.
Yeah. And I love that you said it's a community. And I think it's important, going back to your Bet on Women campaign, that right now, I think a lot of sports betting is geared towards male sports fans. It's on all these men's sports games you see, and it's commercials geared towards guys. And they are really not including women in those advertisements. Their target audience is, again, from my perspective, primarily male. And so I think it's really great that you're saying, look, we're trying to build out this community and we want women to be a part of this. We want people to feel like they can do this. And it's not about putting the house out on a bet on a game, right? Saying, okay, this is next month's mortgage, but I could do this. It's saying, hey, here's $5. I want to have skin in the game, have fun, be able to root for something. Maybe I'm not a fan of a team yet, but I just want to have something to root for. I love that community aspect. And I think it does really help change the narrative and can bring more people involved that maybe haven't been familiar with sports betting before. It's like a nice way to get your feet wet and be able to kind of learn what those things are. So I appreciate you saying that and kind of talking about that community aspect. I think it's really important.
That's something we're really big on. And, the second phase of Bet on Women is focusing on the female bettor, not necessarily the female athletes. It's using Bet on Women to also create a safe space for women that want to bet on sports, for women that are fans of sports, and not just women's sports, all sports. Because if you see any sports betting ad, commercial, whether it's the radio, a billboard, it's all geared towards men. So how do we use Bet on Women too, to make it a community of women, not just about the athlete, but about, women in sports and all different facets of that.
Yeah, I love it. I think it's so important. And I think it's again, like when we're talking about democratizing sports betting, like women have to be in that conversation because women are a huge part of the sports industry. Like you said, we really need to be telling more stories so we see how prevalent women are in the sports industry. And like you said, the journey that you all as athletes or just women working in the industry in general are going through, but the fact that you guys are there, we exist. We're not just, this one off, like the one woman, right? There's tons of us working in the sports space. And I think telling those stories and, like you said, making this an inclusive community is really important. So I really love that. And I guess going into this, how did you guys, again, I know you started this pre-COVID. So how has COVID maybe helped or hurt you in this process? Like, have you seen more people turning to sports betting or looking at what you guys are doing because they're at home and they're watching on TV? Like, tell us a little bit about what the last couple of years have been like for you guys. Has this influenced any of the campaigns you're doing?
So I started with Gaming Society in August. So I missed the...
So you're right in the middle.
Yeah, I missed the building of the company at the height of COVID. But I can answer that question a little bit in that I remember listening to a podcast very early on in the pandemic, and it was with the CEO of DraftKings, and he was mentioning, like, they asked, like, have you seen, since the world is shut down and there's no sports happening, have you seen a drastic, drop off? And he's like, no, people are betting on darts. People are betting on Japanese baseball. Like, people will bet on anything. And I think that's the pandemic showed that this space is one that will survive it because there's always going to be something to bet on. Right. And it's just kind of who's going to be able to innovate faster faster when we're going through things like this, finding that area of opportunity where people are still looking to place money in, and so yeah, I can't answer what it was like for Jamie in the beginning, but it's been great now that sports are obviously pretty much back to normal. Fans are in the stands. It's on schedule, so it's exciting for sure.
Yeah. And I know you guys have the Bet on Women campaign. What's kind of the next big thing you guys have coming up this year? Is it just continuing to push forward with the campaigns you've got? Is there anything new that you guys are really looking to build out? Tell us a little bit about especially in your role in business development, like what kinds of relationships are you guys trying to build? What stories are you trying to tell?
We have a couple cool things in the pipeline. I wish I could speak to them, but
Sure.
as they're in development or in the works, I can't. But there's a couple really cool things that we're all really excited to see come to fruition that we've all been working really hard on. Obviously, with the Bet on Women stuff, I'm super passionate about building that out and just continuing telling the stories. A few things in the development slate, as far as telling the stories of these incredible athletes. Right now, we're doing a really cool campaign around the Winter Olympics, where each day we're picking a female athlete to rally around. So you should check it out. Everybody, listening should check it out as well. But just really cool. We're using this as a way to highlight female athletes that you may not, normally have heard of, and that's gaming society. That's who we're rallying around. Each day, all you have to do is retweet, sign up for our newsletter, and that's your entry. And you can win really cool prizes. So again, it's just about bringing visibility and doing it in a really cool way. And again, my favorite word, building that community.
I love it. No, it's awesome. We'll definitely make sure we plug that in the show notes here for folks. And talking about just your experience with Gaming Society, and I know you've been there for, about 6-7 months now. You're really getting involved with their Bet on Women campaign and everything else. What do you want listeners to take away from your work with Gaming Society, but just what the work you guys are doing, your team is doing in general? Like if someone was to go tell their friend, hey, I heard Marissa Coleman on this podcast talking about Gaming Society. It's so cool. They're doing X. Like, what do you want that one takeaway for folks to be?
That it's about fun. It's about community. It's about having skin in the game and making it just that much more enjoyable. It's not, betting $1,000. It's not serious. It's meant to be fun. It's meant to learn the stories and just, again, building community, and just it's a social thing. And especially, as we're still dealing with this pandemic, it's something to just bring us all closer. And sports is always great at bringing people together of all walks of life. And this is just like an additive to it.
Yeah. And here on the podcast, we love talking to you and all of our guests really about initiatives that are making a difference in society. And I think what you guys are doing, democratizing sports betting, bringing women into the conversation, highlighting women athletes and just women in sports, to us, that's making an impact. And so I want to ask you too, we talk about here the Big League Philanthropist, and philanthropists could be a number of different things and look a number of different ways. So I want to know from you, what does being a philanthropist look like to you? What does that word mean to you? And how do you describe that?
Yeah, so if you would have asked me that about 16 months ago, my answer would have been totally different. But I look at that a lot differently now. And I say that because unfortunately, I lost my mom November 2020. And it was unexpected, out of nowhere. But the outpouring of love that my family and I received, and seeing she's an avid tennis player, and seeing how the tennis community rallied around her, it changed my view on impact, because I've always looked at it at this huge level, that being on the platform I've had, I've always thought to impact and to be that philanthropist and to change lives, it had to be on this grand scale. It had to be where everybody can see it and you're impacting hundreds of thousands of people. But seeing the hundreds of people that rallied around my family and my mom, and all these cool things that they want to do for her to keep, her memory alive, like that really shift how I look at impact and philanthropy, because we all can do that. You don't have to be an athlete, you don't have to be an entertainer, you don't have to be famous, you don't have to be, be wealthy. You can do it at the smallest level. And if you impact 10 people, that's great. That's a great legacy to have. So I definitely, look at it a lot differently now. But it's something I'm very passionate about, and that I've never been naive to the fact that if I couldn't dribble a basketball as well as I could, that a lot of these doors and opportunities, would not have been open for me. I was very fortunate to have two loving parents that I could have told them I wanted to be anything in the world, and they would have put me in the positions to be successful to make that happen. And I know that's not the same for everybody. So opportunity is a huge thing, and the opportunities aren't presented to everybody. So if I can just be the opportunity and having somebody in your corner. I've always had a great support system, and those are two things that I think are huge drivers in success. So if I can even create opportunity for just a couple people, if I can be that that mentor, that advocate for somebody, that for me would be a huge success.
Wow, what amazing answer. I mean, I think it's really awesome to hear the change in the definition for you. And, again, I'm so sorry to hear that you lost your mom, but, I'm glad that you had this community of support that came out with your family. And you're 100% right. Going to the opportunity, it's access to opportunity, having opportunity and then having the access to get there is so important. And I think philanthropy could be that, getting someone access to an opportunity, just time, effort, whatever it is. So I love that. And absolutely doesn't matter if it's one person or 100 people, that counts. So I love that answer. And I appreciate you sharing all of that really great insight. And as we come to our last couple questions here, I want to say that we have a lot of athletes that are looking for how do they get started with making an impact or speaking up about things that they care about, like betting on women and like this campaign to highlight voices of female athletes. But what advice would you give specifically to athletes, regardless of their level, but how do they speak up or how do they get involved with issues that matter to them or drive change using their platform, however big or small it might be?
I think the main advice I'd give is just to reach out to people and step out of your comfort zone. It is uncomfortable. It is scary to just cold email somebody or cold call somebody. But I think as athletes, a lot of times we sell ourselves short. We think that people only care about us in the box that we're in and only as an athlete. And I'm really learning as I'm on this journey that people want to work with us. People see our value. So always keeping that in mind. And when you're reaching out to people, just finding mentors in areas that may interest you. Ask for internships. The worst you'll get is a no. So it's just kind of about being vulnerable and being okay not knowing. There's a lot that I still don't know. And just aligning myself with people that can teach me and help me fill these areas. But I would just say, just reach out to people, especially while you're playing. When you're an active athlete, that's the best time to make these connections and to reach out to people. And you'll be surprised at who's willing to help, especially if you do it in an authentic way. If people really feel like this is something that you're passionate about and that you want to be successful in, they'll extend their resources.
Yeah. And clearly you've done a really great job at building relationships. And just like you said, like asking questions, reaching out to people. And so obviously, like you said, this is how you connected with Jamie and how you got involved with Gaming Society. And I think it just goes to show that if you are authentic and like you said, build those relationships, when you can. And like you said, while you're still playing or while you're still sad to say, but relevant, in that public sphere, it makes a huge difference. Not to say you can't do it after, but, it makes it a little easier on yourself. So I appreciate you sharing that. It's really, really great advice. And I appreciate all your time today. As we wrap up, I want to know, where can people find you on the internet or on social, wherever you want people to connect with you? And then where can folks learn more and go find out more about Gaming Society or Bet on Women campaign? So tell us a little bit about where we can go to get involved.
To get involved. Okay. So for me, I'm not that active on social media, but on Twitter and Instagram, it's at Marissa C_25. But yes, Gaming Society, way more important than me. Go to thegamingsociety.com, subscribe to our newsletters. We have our Bet on Women report, and then we have our GS report. Both give you a lot of insight on betting, on what's happening in sports. We have a great editorial team. They'll make you laugh as well. But definitely subscribe to our newsletter. We're on social as well. But that's the best way to keep up to date. Even with the Olympics stuff we're doing right now, subscribe to our newsletter and you'll get all the details.
Awesome. Well, we'll make sure we put all that in the show notes. We'll tag you too, just so people want to go follow you, even though it doesn't have to be perfectly active, but we'll make sure people can follow you and keep up with what you're doing. But Marissa, thank you so much for joining us today. Love what you guys are doing at Gaming Society. A huge shout out to Carolina who helped us connect here, and thank you to her for connecting us together. But yeah, thank you for all the work you're doing. Thank you for coming on the show and chatting with us. It was really awesome to hear your journey.
Thanks so much. I had a great time. This was fun.
Awesome. Thank you. And we'll see you guys next time on Big League Philanthropist.